Today, I am going to be teaching on working with mental afflictions. And of course, in Buddhism in general, what we are working with always is our mind and our mind's reactions and relations to to ourselves and then to others and outer objects. That we often don't realize this, don't acknowledge it, or even don't want to acknowledge it, but our minds are very flexible. That, but we need to allow them to be flexible. We need to allow them space to, you might say, move around in. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche would say that our minds are like Play-Doh. That might be a very dated analogy, but I'll go with it. Traditionally, it's said that our minds are like a wish-fulfilling jewel, that our minds are the source of permanent happiness, of primordial wisdom. Our minds are the source of attaining deathlessness, because ultimately our minds are deathless. They are uncreated, unborn, and therefore undying. So that is why our minds are like a wish-fulfilling jewel. The problem is that we don't relate to that. We might have heard this, we might even agree with it, but deep down, we really do not believe it fully and chase after happiness in the external world. Now, there are different ways of approaching working with our minds to uncover this wish-fulfilling jewel. One of them is to start with meditation, and that with a regular meditation practice, your mind settles down. And as the mind settles down, its inherent clarity appears. Just like if you have a jar of muddy water, as long as you are agitating the jar, you have muddy water. But if you set it down, it will gradually settle. The mud goes to the bottom, and the natural clarity of the mind manifests. And this is traditional, and it worked really well in Tibet centuries ago. The same thing in India, way back to the time of the Buddha. But the other way to approach this is that to address our mental afflictions which cause our minds to be agitated and be full of quote unquote mud, which makes the water muddy. And my own experience is that in today's world, with the Westerners that I have worked with, that their minds are so wild, and it's very difficult to settle down and have a strong meditation practice where the mind just settles down and is able to rest in awareness, and an awareness that sees thoughts and emotions when they arise, but the awareness remains and they're not overpowered by these thoughts and emotions that arise. So what I frequently talk about is mental afflictions, because they can be so strong that they need to be, you might say, their intensity needs to be reduced. The heat needs to be turned down, so to speak. And as that happens, then the meditator has a more stable meditation. And when I mean stable, it isn't resting without thoughts. It isn't resting and having a bliss or a what you might think an excellent experience. What it is that your awareness, when you get lost in thoughts, your awareness comes back and you realize that you are lost in these thoughts and you come back to the object of meditation, which usually is the breath. Another reason why I talk about mental afflictions is that they cause us so much suffering that this is why they're called an affliction, is because we are afflicted with them just like we can be afflicted with a disease. So I will go into what they are in a few minutes. But what came to mind when I was preparing for this talk was how well the the Buddha and his followers, the Indian Siddhas, and then the Tibetans, how well they understood how mind works. That it really hasn't been recently until Westerners in the field of science, psychology, and so forth have delved into the mind anywhere near as deeply as the Indian and Tibetans have. So I wanted to start out here by describing one of the hells. In Buddhism, there are different realms within cyclic existence, and these realms are created by the beings that are in them by their minds and their perception. They think that all of this is outside of them and external, and they've been, that this is the way things are, that there's not any other possibilities. And the human realm is the one that we're familiar with, of course, but the animal realm is another one. But the one that comes to mind immediately to me when I was preparing this was the hell realm. And there are lots of different hell realms. And they all, again, depend on a person's perception and what their habitual patterns are and the accumulation of negative karma that they have, you might say, collected, their mind has collected over lifetime after lifetime. One of these is called the Hell of Razor Sharp Leaves. And it is described this way, that this is the landscape is full of plants and trees that have razor sharp leaves that cut if you touch them. And at the top of one of the trees is your beloved. And you gingerly climb up the tree, avoiding the leaves, and are able to get up to the top unscathed. And as you were about to embrace your beloved turns into a demon and chases you down the tree. And of course, in your haste to get away, you slip, fall, and are shredded, cut to pieces. The pieces fall to the ground. You are magically made whole. And again, you look up and there your beloved is at the top of the tree, and you do it all over again. Now, this, first of all, exhibits a pattern when you are in an abusive relationship. But quite honestly, it goes much deeper than that. Because if you really look at your own life, you will find that are a number of things that you have done and worked hard to attain and so forth. And in the end, it all falls apart. And basically, you suffer tremendously as a result of all of this. And then you go back and do something similar and have a similar experience. That this really describes the lives that many of us lead. And of course, it's all because of our habitual patterns. And habitual patterns are merely a form of karma that our minds have been conditioned through our past actions to perceive things a certain way and respond in a certain way to circumstances. You could say the same way or similar ways to different circumstances. It is a pattern where you really don't see any other possibilities, that this is just the way it is. And you might even feel there's nothing that I can do about it. So I am going to tell you a story of a person who I am not going to name, but it's a person that I know. Uh, it reminds me when I was, again, preparing this for a talk, for the talk, of a detective show, a police detective show that I watched when I was a kid. And at the beginning, there was this disclaimer: these stories are true, only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. So I'm going to try to, and this is not about any student of mine. I know people that aren't my students. This person is not even a Buddhist. But this person grew up in a traumatic household. And he had sisters, and he will say that I was smarter than my sisters, because I learned to manipulate my father rather than try to go head to head with him. I saw what my sisters experienced. I was younger, and I just realized that the only way out of this was to manipulate. And so he married and said, I married my father, that the woman that I married actually behaved just like my father. And of course, the person was abusive, ended in divorce. The person is presently seeing a psychiatrist. This person has a child who, again, the trauma was passed on to the child. The child, I know, the child is seeing a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist told the child that her father has borderline personality disorder. And I could go on and on and on and on and on, but he feels that he was smarter, and it's no problem. So what we have to really do is start looking deeply at ourselves, and because that's where the solution is. The you might say the common approach is, it reminds me of a song that I heard a number of years ago, which is "The Road to Nowhere." That there are endless roads out there in the samsara. They all lead to nowhere, and it's so easy to think that if I just change the channel, get on another road, and don't change anything within, then I will eventually find a place where I am happy and will be successful and will not experience pain, and so on and so forth. Renunciation is a word that is used a lot in Buddhism. And it's usually used in terms of renouncing samsara or a cyclic existence. But it's not an all or nothing situation. What needs to be renounced is the samsaric approach, first of all. What needs to be renounced is that what I am doing now will work if I just do more of it. What needs to be adapted is I need to make changes, and not just little changes. I really have to renounce certain behavior and try new patterns of behavior. Try something different.
I do have a question. So mental afflictions can be a result of conditioned existence. So if you can look at conditioned existence as childhood trauma, then you can see where your mental affliction, what caused it, what it's resulting from. And so any kind of problem that arises, I'm always going to respond in that traumatic way. And so what you're really talking about, what I'm hearing is we're reprogramming that internal GPS to try to go somewhere different. And I guess my question is, how do you trust that? You know, when you're just so used to everything a certain way, responding a certain way, how do you trust that path to something different? Because it's like no matter where I am on the path, I'm always just 1 foot from the gutter. You know. So I just, how do I develop kind of that trust that or even remember that I've got a different tool in my toolbox to use in this scenario?
Well, first of all, that's an excellent question, because trust is a huge part of this. That what happens is that not only do you learn to not trust other people, but you don't even trust yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so my own experience has been that you need to make friends with yourself to develop some trust towards yourself. And little by little by little, one interesting suggestion is that when you get in a situation where ordinarily you would immediately go there, is try something different, anything different. I mean, anything, but just something different because it breaks the pattern.
See, that's the key there, is trying to find something external that kind of breaks that pattern, kind of breaks that routine. Reliving trauma. It's finding that external thing that say, oh, here I can do this. When I do that myself, I trail off. I'm not aware of my surroundings, and it's actually my dogs that pick up on that, and
Yeah,
she'll come in and wake me up out of it, so to speak. But it's got to take. There's a lot of times it's got to take some kind of an external anything really.
yeah. That's usually, I think, called a dissociation.
Yeah, yeah,
And you'll learn that when you're young because it's a way to escape.
yeah, exactly.
My body might be here, but my mind isn't.
Exactly. That happens every time I do a silent meditation, I relive trauma and I'm gone. And then before I know it, so much time has passed.
Yeah, yeah. That's what happens. The interesting thing is this. First of all, that we've had past lives, that our minds are unborn, undying, indestructible. And where we are today is a result of what we've done in past lives. And it's good to realize that this is merely not the first chapter of this book that we don't like, that this is it might be chapter 1,300,000 and uh, and also to realize that if you don't change these patterns, you'll just keep on reliving them a lifetime after lifetime.
Right.
Uh, Part of being on the Bodhisattva path is developing fearlessness. And what the fearlessness means is not having totally free of fear, but not being controlled by the fear. It's called courage. Again, courage to do something different. Courage to, my own experience was to look into what I experienced as a child, but look at it deeply, not just superficially. And really get to know that frightened child in there. Uh, and to give that frightened child comfort, protection, get to know that child. And so I will be going into more tools, but this is a really important point. It is developing a positive relationship with yourself, trusting yourself, comforting that inner child, that wounded child that is there, and realizing that all you have left of that childhood are thoughts, and memories are just thoughts. It's all conceptual, and that it's over with. It can never happen again. You can never be abused as a child in this lifetime because you're no longer a child.
Yeah. I'm definitely my mind's favorite victim. Where I get caught up in it is the physical pain that's involved as well.
I'm just going to make an observation. There was this assault on the Capitol on the 6th of January. Two of the police officers commit suicide afterwards. I've never heard anything about why, but my guess is that it was the trauma, that it just brought up other trauma and it was more than they could handle.
Yeah.
That is, I'm not a trained psychiatrist or psychologist. It's just that this is what I have, you might say, learned working with myself, working with other people, working in the prison. Prison is full of men. I didn't work with women, but I know it's this way with women that have been sexually assaulted as children. And it's the same way with men. It's amazing how often male kids are sexually assaulted or otherwise abused. And many of them end up in prison and commit suicide and on and on and on. But it goes back to realizing that all of this can be reframed. And you're just having it's one viewpoint. I'd like to use the word, and this is kind of pejoratively, you're fox newsing it. You think it's news, but it's really very biased opinion. And again, it's past. Now, I guess I'm showing my liberal tendencies here. We could say we're MSNBC newsing it, Huffington Post newsing it, or whatever. But the point is, we're giving a very biased view of what actually happened. What I learned about my parents was that my mother behaved a lot like an inmate that I got close to because he worked in the chapel. He was an inmate chapel worker. And I saw a lot of him. And he behaved just like my mother in terms of control, trust, on and on and on. And he had been sexually abused as a kid and had other trauma. And I even spoke to a social worker about this, and she said, according to the way my mother behaved, which was very paranoid, that if she was sexually abused, it was from someone outside the household. Mom died in 2014. 2 years ago, my sister said she was talking to a cousin of ours, and her mother told her that there was a sexual predator in the neighborhood when she grew up. And so where I'm going here is sometimes you have to even look into, well, why is it that these people behaved this way? That they didn't behave this way because they were having a good day. That they were behaving this way because they were really suffering. And I'll never know this about Mom, but let's just say I have a high degree of certainty that this was her experience. She had two brothers, both successful. One was a good Lutheran minister. The other took over the family business, which was, of all things, a mortuary. And it grew under his leadership. And now his son, my cousin, is leading it. And he's training his son to take over the business because he's getting older. And it's the biggest funeral home in Madison. Last I heard is that they did over 50% of the business and the competitors had to split the rest. That's what he told me. That's how successful it was. Yet my mother had four sisters. Three of them behaved very much like Mom. Bouts with mental illness. Another one had a lot of personal problems. And I guess the third one, again, failed marriages, personal problems, and on and on and on and on and on. The fourth one was happy. When she went into a nursing home because of her ill health, and her husband had already passed away, one of the first things she did, talk to one of the staff there, and she got permission. She organized a kazoo band. That's how happy she was. And I can, even my uncle said one time to me, he was wondering if this was genetic because he had taken his sister to the psychiatric ward so often. So if you start looking at from the other side or looking more deeply and looking around besides, this is what I'm suffering, you'll start realizing that, hey, it's not just me, that this whole household was suffering. I also came to realize, and this is never be proved because my dad is dead too, but I realized late in life when I got close to them, because before it was like, I don't want to have anything to do with you, that he probably had Asperger's syndrome because of the way he behaved and his lack of being able to form a emotional relationship. And he was bright, he was successful, but he was unable to have that emotional. And so, I had a mother that was literally insane and a father that would not make an emotional relationship with you. And what I found was, this is wonderful material. This is what brought me to be a Lama. It made me realize suffering and realizing, hey, I want to get out of this place. I renounce this. I don't like this. This stinks. This is a piece of crap. So that is my answer to your question, and we'll go into this in more detail. A question was asked about, is shamatha a tool that can be used to help work with dissociation when you tend to just kind of blank out? And it frequently can be, shall we say, learned tool as a child when you're in a traumatic, painful environment. And I would say that shamatha can help work with that. The first thing is, which is good just because of the question, to be aware of the fact that you do this and that it is a problem. And with shamatha, the idea is when you become aware of, you're not following the breath, if it's the object of meditation, or if there's another object of meditation, that you're not following that you're just kind of spacing out, which I would call disassociation. Or sometimes it can be that you just go way, way out in left field, so to speak, with thoughts. And every time you bring yourself back to the object of meditation, you are developing a habit of awareness, being aware of what's happening right now. And I feel that this can weaken that tendency to disassociate. Also, it's just plain good to realize that you are doing this whenever you are doing it, when you're not on the cushion, to realize, oh, I have this tendency, that you're in a conversation with somebody, but you really don't want to be there, and all of a sudden you just blank out. And you might say, make extra effort to listen or give some input. But get to know yourself, get to know how this works. And the more you understand about it, the less power it has over you. I have said this over and over and over again, and that is that you make friends with whatever it is inside of you, that inner critic, this tendency to disassociate, or lots of other negative things. Get to know it rather than pushing it away. Get to know it very, very, very well, and have it become a very good friend of yours. But remember that frequently your friends give you bad advice, and you don't have to follow the advice of your friend. The question is that, first of all, some people have not had that traumatic childhood, And then the other aspect of it was that even if there has been difficult aspects of childhood, isn't it better to just let go of that and work with what's happening in the present time, rather than by going back, you're just reliving it, holding on to it. And basically, it doesn't exist anymore because it's gone. It's in the past. And I think ideally, and this is the Tibetan approach, and I think other forms of Buddhism too, is the past is past. Let it go. Let's work what's happening right now and go in a different direction. So they are different approaches. First of all, again, our childhood is not chapter one, and that we can bring in, you might say, patterns developed from trauma from past lives. And so we can bring that in with us. And of course, we can't go back and relive past lives. It's just impossible. And Buddhists, at least Tibetans, don't do past life regressions, which was quite popular a few decades ago. We don't do any of that. What I have found helpful, though, personally and with other people, is to go back and look at it. But then by bringing up the memory and then looking at it more deeply and start seeing things differently than you did before you brought it up and looked at it, then when you let go of the memory and it goes back, it's like you have taken a document, brought it up, edited, and then saved it and put it back. That this can actually change memories, because memories are just thoughts. Our minds are very flexible, and there is actually scientific evidence that this is what happens. And some teachers, some Buddhist teachers, not necessarily in the Tibetan tradition, will recommend to go back and heal that inner wounded child. For whatever reason, those wounds are there, they are there, but it is not to wallow in it. It's a huge difference. And there is actually a phrase in the 7 points of mind training, which is the manure of our experience. And I used to do gardening and hobby farming, and I used to keep animals, and I even had a manure spreader, because you got to do something with the manure. You can't just let it sit around. It gets too deep. And it turns out the manure is a very fertile substance. You might say it's a growth accelerant. How about that for lingo? And in Western psychology, there's a new term, which is post-traumatic growth. And the points are the same, that by going back, looking at these things, we can actually use them for spiritual growth, rather than holding us down in chaining us, keeping us prisoner. We can use them to grow. And so when you're doing regular shamatha, sitting meditation, of course, when they come up, let go, constantly let go. But when you are going through your daily life, I honestly feel it's good sometimes to take a little time and then look within and start seeing things more different, and seeing things differently. Perhaps, as I said earlier, from the viewpoint of a parent, or from the viewpoint of somebody else that you're having a difficult day with. And this can really help a lot in understanding the our mental afflictions. Any other questions? If not, then I will continue with the teaching. So the basic mental afflictions are referred to as the 5 poisons, and they are desire, and then aversion, indifference, denial is the third one, plus arrogance and pride, and then jealousy. But behind all of them is the, you might say, the basis, the main cause, and that is it's called ignorance, basic ignorance, and that is taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be an other. And this is an active form of ignorance. It takes, you might say, action on our part for this ignorance. We're actually, you might say, thinking that we are independent of everything else, that we are separate, different. And it's interesting because along with that, we tend to think that we are superior. And the bizarre thing is that some people, instead of thinking that they are superior to other people in terms of being better, they think that they are superior to other people in terms of being worse. I have met a number of people. Again, I used to be a prison chaplain, and the prisons are full of people like this that think on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is as good as you can get, maybe a Milarepa or the Buddha, and a 1 is Adolf Hitler. They would rank themselves as a 1 or maybe a 1.5. And again, I've run into many people on the outside that feel that same way, that there is this active aspect to this ignorance about thinking that you are different and better, either better this way or better down that way. And of course, because of Buddha nature, we're not better, we're not worse. And but it is that separating phenomena into self and others that sets up the whole thing, because now there is an I, and once there is an I, there is I like this, I don't like that, I'm going to space out that over there, I'm going to disassociate, I just don't want to deal with it. It's April 15th, and I'm going to do just like I did the last 10 years and file for an extension on my income taxes because I haven't gotten around to it. And that is this not the fundamental ignorance, but it is the klesha ignorance, the mental affliction of ignorance. And I like to use it, ignore ants, ignoring things, not little things that crawl around in your kitchen by your sugar. And then there's pride, and then there's jealousy. And my favorite example of jealousy, I think many people have had. You go to your favorite restaurant with a group of friends, and you order your favorite food, and everybody else orders their food. The waitress comes, puts the food on the table in front of everybody, and you look at yours and look at your friends, and you think, oh, I wish I would have ordered that. Yeah, it always looks better. I shouldn't say it always, it frequently looks better on somebody else's plate. You get somebody else's plate, and then, well, that plate over there looks better than what's on my plate. Yeah, I mean, that's jealousy. And it's just the way our samsaric minds work. And needless to say, this causes a huge amount of problems. It's needless to say, it's a symptom of dissatisfaction with who we are, where we are, what we're experiencing, and so forth. And if it's your favorite restaurant, I'm sure that what you got that you thought maybe wasn't quite as good as somebody else's would still provide you the nourishment that your body needed in that meal. I mean, it has nothing to do with nourishment. It all has to do with our projections, with our minds, and our confusion, of course. So basically, what we need to do is understand the basic situation and then develop this idea of renunciation, thinking, I'd like things to be different. I'd like things to be better. I'm tired of the same old, same old. This is getting pretty old. It's kind of smelling a little bit, perhaps even. And maybe it's time to compost this manure.